And a shot in the arm for Australia's COVID-19 vaccination drive. It is set to receive 500,000 shots this week as part of a vaccine swap deal with Singapore.
For more, we're joined by Australia's High Commissioner to Singapore, Mr. Will Hodgman. Mr. Hodgman, how much can 500,000 vaccines help Australia's inoculation effort, given the containment strategy effort has run into so much trouble up to now?
Well, thank you very much for having me on this program. And it is another significant day in the very strong relationship that Australia and Singapore enjoys, and it's demonstrative of the trusted and reliable partnership that our nations share, that we could ensure that this agreement was struck, and to have 500,000 vaccines into Australia this week will go a significant way. And I must say that Australia's efforts to contain the virus have indeed been quite successful compared to other nations. Tragically, 1,006 Australians have died, and there have been 54,000 cases of COVID-19 in Australia. But that's a relatively strong performance when it comes to Australia containing the virus and ensuring that our citizens are safe. And this additional supply of vaccines at a time when we're really ramping up our vaccination program will help ensure that more Australians are protected from this dangerous virus.
There has been criticism, Mr. Hodgson, within Australia about sort of the speed of these vaccine rollouts and how it's sort of handled sort of locking down various parts of Australia. What would you say to that, and what lessons can be learned from sort of what's been going on in New South Wales in particular?
Yeah, and certainly we're all learning as we go along what is uncharted territory. And in Australia, our vaccination program is now really picking up speed, and with close to 1 million on average per week, these additional vaccines will not only help us maintain that momentum, but will allow the Australian program to reach younger Australians particularly, and to ensure that those in communities that have been affected are able to receive vaccinations as soon as possible, so that we can transition to a phase in Australia's national plans where lockdowns are less likely.
So these vaccines being sent now, they're important and they're timely for Australia. But can you share with us what made this deal possible?
Well, I do believe that the very strong relationship between our governments and what was an initial discussion between our foreign ministers, which then involved health ministers, agencies both here in Singapore and in Australia working cooperatively. My team here at the Australian High Commission also doing all we can and working very closely with the excellent officials in the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Health here in Singapore, have been able to facilitate what some have described to me as a record pace for an agreement of this type. I should note also that Pfizer-BioNTech have been an important partner. It's their vaccines that will make their way to Australia later this week, and it's their vaccines that will return to Singapore in December, at a time when Singapore will similarly look to increase its vaccination uptake, with potentially more long-term pass holders coming into the country and booster shots required for those of us who live here. So it's very timely, it's agile, it's demonstrative, as I say, of a really important partnership between our nations, as Prime Ministers Morrison and Lee said publicly today. And it will be another significant episode in the strong story that is Australia and Singapore's very positive relations.
As part of the swap deal, Mr. Hodgman, Australia is set to return the same number of shots in December, as you mentioned. What happens, though, if Australia doesn't meet its 80% inoculation target by year end?
Well, that's certainly the expectation. And of course, in these uncertain times, it would be foolish for anyone to assume necessarily that we could predict with great certainty, other than to say that if we continue at the rate that we're now currently vaccinating Australians, then we will meet that target of 80% by year's end. And that will mean, importantly, the opportunity for Australia to open up not only in our domestic communities and in domestic travel and movements, but also, really importantly, in international travel. And as our Prime Minister said just recently, it would be Singapore that's likely to top the list of a destination for Australians to visit and, of course, for Singaporeans to visit Australia. So we'll certainly remain focused, and I know the governments in Australia and Singapore will on the task ahead of us. And as I say, if we meet the current projections, then that target will indeed be achieved.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hodgman, for spending some time with us this evening. Australia's High Commissioner to Singapore, Mr. Will Hodgman.